It is now 89 seconds to midnight. This is the closest the world has ever been to midnight. Any move towards midnight should be taken as an indication of extreme danger and an unmistakable warning.
The doomsday clock has been updated to 89 seconds to midnight, and midnight represents the end of human civilization or global catastrophe. The concept of the doomsday clock was created in 1947 by a group called the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. It's a metaphorical warning system to let us know how great the risks are that we're facing at any given time. When they first made it, they placed it at 7 minutes away from midnight because they were scared of nuclear catastrophe. Since then, they've started to factor in other types of apocalyptic events that we might face, like global pandemics, if technology emerges that might end civilization. Climate change is a big one. But they changed it to 89 seconds to midnight, and here are their reasons why. Nuclear weapons are a big one. The Russia-Ukraine war, ongoing Middle East tensions, AI is big on the list. Climate change, biological threats, and pandemic risks are also big on there. And the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, the group that made this decision to move it to 89 seconds to midnight, called out the United States, Russia, and China as having the biggest responsibility for pulling the world back from the brink. So hopefully that happens. Hopefully we're safe.
The doomsday clock was just updated, and I can't believe what they did with it this year. Yes, the doomsday clock is a real thing, and they update it every couple of years to tell the world how close we are to nuclear Armageddon. It's set by minutes to midnight, which tells us how close we are to midnight, which in this case is the end of the world through nuclear warfare. The closer to zero this number is, the closer we are to worldwide apocalypse. Typically, dangerous global events tells us how much we move the clock every year, and we had no shortage of that in 2023. The latest update before this one was in January 2023, when it was set to the closest time in history at 90 seconds from midnight, down from 100 seconds in 2022. And in 2024, they did something that I just did not expect. Here's a chart of doomsday clock updates over the years since it got created, and as you can see, we're getting pretty close, which is no surprise to anyone. Designed back in 1947, it was founded by a group called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which included, among others, the true atom bomb OG, your boy Einstein. They're a group of nuclear scientists who got a little shook from all the nuclear testing that was going on in the 40s and 50s, so they took it into their own hands to warn and educate the public on the dangers of nuclear weapons. If it wasn't obvious enough, the invention of nukes was a big deal, and I actually showed you how you can make your own in my How to Build a Nuke series. When the clock was first created in 1947, it was set to 7 minutes from midnight, which was actually considered pretty close at the time. It got pushed to 3 minutes in 1949 and then 2 minutes in 1953 because of all the nuclear testing the US and Soviet Union were doing back then. And people were for real panicking about it back then. Man, if they only knew what was coming. In 1963, it set a new record for the furthest from midnight at 12 minutes due to the partial test ban treaty signed by the US and Soviet Union, which limited nuclear testing. Then back to 7 minutes in 1968 when France and China started testing nukes, and also the Vietnam War. 1972, we get more treaties like the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty that limited long-range missile production, bringing us right back to 12 minutes. But India ruined that in 1974 when they started testing nukes, 9 minutes from midnight. Then 1984 is when shit got real, taking us all the way to 3 minutes when nuclear negotiations between the US and Soviet Union got delayed, and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan didn't help. 1991 was probably the closest we've ever gotten to world peace. The collapse of the Soviet Union brought us all the way to 17 minutes from midnight, the furthest we've ever been in history. Uno reversed to 9 minutes in 1998 when India and Pakistan started testing more nukes. Then to 5 minutes in 2007 when our good old pals in North Korea got in on the nuke action. It sort of hovered around the 5 to 7 minute range until 2015 when everyone started freaking out again. It got pushed to 3 minutes that year when the US and Russia started modernizing their nuclear weapons programs, and climate change started to get factored in. 2017, 2.5 minutes, which they explicitly stated was largely due to Trump's irresponsible attitude towards the N-bombs. Crazy how that turned out, didn't it? Inching to 2 minutes in 2018 when Kim Jong-un started testing the bigger, badder hydrogen bombs, and updated to 100 seconds in January 2020, which was just a month before the whole, 2020 thing went down. Factoring cyber misinformation warfare into the mix, oh man, they really didn't know what was coming. Stayed at 100 seconds in 2021 and 2022, probably to keep people from panicking, now factoring in the threat of AI and and, you know, that other thing. And we hit a world first last year in 2023 at 90 seconds from midnight, largely due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But now, whoa, we got so much more happening in the world. We should probably be at the very brink of midnight. For 2024, the doomsday clock has been updated to 90 seconds, exactly where it was last year. Honestly, not that I'm complaining or anything, but I gotta call bullshit on that one. We all know shit went down last year and WWIII was on everyone's mind. We've had multiple governing bodies around the world explicitly state they're not afraid to go nuclear, the whole Israel-Palestine thing. On top of that, the constant reminder of the next scary infectious virus, AI spreading like crazy. And did everyone forget about all those aliens and UFOs we saw back in 2023? I don't know about you, but I kind of get the feeling they purposely kept it at 90 seconds so the world doesn't erupt into mass panic or something. Maybe the clock holds more influence on the global population than we know, and the bulletin that sets it every year got bought out by the powers that be. Huh, of course not. You'd have to be crazy to think that.
We're apparently very close to a man-made apocalypse. There's only 89 seconds left till the doomsday clock hits midnight. But what actually is it? The doomsday clock symbolizes how close humanity is to destruction, and this is the closest it's ever been. Conflict in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, AI and climate change are some of the contributing factors. That's according to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, who set the clock every year. It was originally set up in 1947 by J. Robert Oppenheimer and fellow US scientists. They previously developed the atomic bomb and saw its devastating effects after World War II and in Japan. So they wanted to warn the public and pressure world leaders to never use nuclear weapons again. The doomsday clock was first set at 7 minutes to midnight in 1947. In 1991 it fell back to 17 minutes to midnight, and last year it was left unchanged at 90 seconds. So this year we're a second closer. But what happens if it actually strikes midnight? We don't really know, but its creators said a move of even a single second should be taken as an indication of extreme danger.
It is now 89 seconds to midnight. This is the closest the world has ever been to midnight. Any move towards midnight should be taken as an indication of extreme danger and an unmistakable warning.
The doomsday clock was set to 89 seconds to midnight, which means we are the closest we have ever been to the end of the world. But what does this actually mean? Well, let me explain. First doomsday clock was set in June 1947 by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And no, it doesn't mean that in 89 seconds the world's going to end and we're all doomed. It also doesn't go down every single year. In fact, in 2023 and 2024, it didn't move and it stayed at 90 seconds to midnight. In 1947, it was set to 7 minutes to midnight. And then in 1991, it actually went further back to 17 minutes to midnight. Now it's 89 seconds to midnight, and that is the closest it's ever actually been to midnight. I'm sure you're all wondering, well, what does midnight even mean? No one knows. No one fully knows what had happened when the clock eventually hits midnight, because midnight has never actually happened before. It's supposed to symbolize the end of the world as we know it. Obviously, that's never happened before. No one actually knows what it's supposed to look like. This clock is literally just a metaphor. It's not any kind of prediction. It's literally just a symbol that's used to scare people, especially world leaders, because it's supposed to show them that what they do in the world and what they bring into the world, like nuclear weapons, AI is also being included in this recent one, things like that, that all has an effect on the world. These scientists are saying that these creations bring us one step closer to doomsday. I mean, if we're going from 17 minutes to midnight in 1991, and then just 34 years later we're this close to doomsday, it is something that people should take seriously. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments, so make sure you follow in for all the latest news.
The doomsday clock has been set to 89 seconds to midnight. But what does this really mean? The doomsday clock is a symbol that represents the likelihood of a man-made global catastrophe. It was created in 1947 by Robert Oppenheimer, Albert Einstein, and Eugene Rabinowitz to warn humanity of the dangers of nuclear war. But it's a metaphor, not a prediction for threats to humanity. In January each year, the hands of the clock are moved closer or further away from midnight, based on scientists' readings of existential threats at a particular time. Midnight marks a hypothetical global catastrophe, and the time is set by members of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Since its creation, the doomsday clock has been set backwards 8 times and forward 17 times. The furthest the hands of the clock have ever been from midnight was in 1991, when the US and Soviet Union signed the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. But the closest they've ever been to catastrophe is January 2025, when the hands were set to just 89 seconds to midnight. An advancement of 1 second, Scientists have explained that the hands of the doomsday clock have been moved forward as they believe the threat to humanity has increased in the last year. For the past 2 years, the clock has already sat at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest they had ever been, thanks to the effects of the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, artificial intelligence, and the failure to address the climate crisis. In 2025, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists have continued to cite nuclear weapons, climate change, and the potential misuse of biological science and emerging technology as factors that have ticked the clock 1 second closer to catastrophe.
The doomsday clock for 2025 has been set to 89 seconds to midnight. Last year it was 90 seconds to midnight, so we lost a second. This is the closest humanity has ever been to midnight since the inception of this clock in the 40s. Now, why are we this close to midnight? Well, nuclear risks, AI advancement, and climate change were cited today. Scientists said that ongoing conflicts over like Ukraine and stuff are heightening nuclear tension, and that rapid development of AI could lead to global destabilization. And then, of course, climate change continues to pose a great threat to humanity. Now, throughout this whole video, you've been asking what the hell is the doomsday clock and who sets the doomsday clock? Well, the doomsday clock is supposed to be a symbol of how close humanity is to a global catastrophe. And who sets the doomsday clock? Well, it's 18 specialists in security and science. So really, really smart people saying that, hey, y'all need to get your shit together.
The doomsday clock is a symbolic clock face. It represents the likelihood of a global catastrophe. Midnight on the clock symbolizes such a catastrophe. It has been maintained since 1947 by scientists. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists manages this clock. Originally, it symbolized nuclear threats. Now, it includes climate change and disruptive technologies. The clock's time changes to reflect current threats. In 2020, it was set to 100 seconds to midnight. This is the closest it has ever been. The decision is made by the Science and Security Board. They consider world events and expert opinions. The clock aims to provoke public awareness and action. Its purpose is to encourage global efforts for safety. To stay informed, like and subscribe for more content.
Fam, come here. We are 89 seconds from midnight on the world clock, doomsday clock. That's the closest we've ever been. Shit's crazy. Protect your loved ones. Stay safe.
This is the Doomsday Clock. It was designed back in 1947 by artist Martel Langsdorff, and the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists sets the clock to show how much time we have left until midnight. Midnight in this case meaning nuclear Armageddon and the end of humanity. In January 2017, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists revealed that the clock ticked 30 seconds closer than last year to the end of times, and cited, among other things, climate change, cybersecurity, nuclear weapons, and Donald Trump as causes. At the announcement, Executive Director of the Bulletin, Rachel Bronson, said there were two concerns that stood above the rest.
The first has been the cavalier and reckless language used across the globe, especially in the United States, during the presidential election and after. And the second is a growing disregard of scientific expertise.
Cold War and world conflict have influenced the clock's time over the years, but disregard for scientific expertise by global populist leaders, including an American president, has never been cited as a doomsday factor. That said, the newest changes to the clock are the smallest in its history, meaning doomsday, thankfully, isn't necessarily any more imminent. So how accurate is the doomsday clock? And why was it made in the first place? The doomsday clock first debuted in 1947 as a graphic on the cover of the first edition of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists magazine. Artist Martel Langsdorff was married to Alexander Langsdorff Jr., a Manhattan Project scientist. Langsdorff and other concerned scientists founded the Bulletin 2 years prior, feeling a responsibility to warn and educate the public about the possibly disastrous consequences of their creations. Atomic bombs had been used for the first time in 1945, killing 130,000 residents of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Initially, the time on the clock depicted the hour hand pointing straight at the 0 hour, with the minute hand placed at just 7 minutes before midnight. The time was completely arbitrary, though. Langsdorff just thought it seemed the right time. The graphic quickly adopted the name of the Doomsday Clock, and eventually gained world recognition as a symbol for the threat of an impending nuclear apocalypse. Since 1947, the Bulletin has regularly adjusted the clock face when they perceive a change in threat level, also taking into account other non-nuclear factors like climate change, bioweapons, and cyber threats. Doomsday seems just a few ticks away now, but time on this clock doesn't really reflect actual time, nor is it particularly linear. In 1949, the Bulletin set the clock to 3 minutes until midnight due to Soviet Union nuclear testing,
Truman's dramatic announcement that Russia had the atom secret,
and to 2 minutes until midnight in 1953, thanks to the US developing the hydrogen bomb. But a decade later, the clock turned back to 12 minutes before midnight, thanks to the US and Soviet Union ending atmospheric nuclear testing.
a milestone in '63. East and West banned the testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere.
The minute hand has continued to fluctuate through a range of minutes before midnight since then, from 7 minutes till in 1968 thanks to Vietnam, to 10 minutes till in 1972 at the signing of the first Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty.
This is not an agreement which guarantees that there will be no war. But what this is the beginning of a process that is enormously important.
To 3 minutes till in 1984 thanks to the heightened tensions between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
None of the 4 wars in my lifetime came about because we were too strong. It is weakness that invites adventurous adversaries to make mistaken judgments.
And all the way back to 17 minutes till in 1991, after the end of the Cold War and the signing of START, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty.
Whether about issues on which we agreed or disagreed, the spirit of candor and openness, a desire not just to understand, but to build bridges, shone through.
In every case, dangerous or potentially dangerous events dictated whether the minute hand moved closer to or away from doomsday. But 2017 is the first time since the Cold War that the Bulletin expressed deep concern about the disposition of an American president towards science and nuclear weapons.
First of all, you don't want to say take everything off the table.
No, just
you're
nuclear.
a bad negotiator if you do
Just
that.
nuclear.
Look, nuclear should be off the table. But would there be a time when it could be used? Possibly.
Okay.
Even though the outlook seems grim, it's important to remember what the time on the clock is really meant to show. It's not doomsday yet. And on this clock, we can turn back time.
It is the determination of the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists that the world has not made sufficient progress on existential risks threatening all of humanity. We thus move the clock forward. In setting the clock closer to midnight, we send a stark signal. Because the world is already perilously close to the precipice, any move towards midnight should be taken as an indication of extreme danger and an unmistakable warning. Every second of delay in reversing course increases the probability of global disaster. It is now 89 seconds to midnight. This is the closest the world has ever been to midnight.
Do you know you have 30 minutes?
Are you kidding me?
30 minutes? Yes.